Let's have a look at a few of the slides. We've been talking about books and truth and language and matching up the right book with the right child. I can take a different name on the internet. You remember, well, some of you may remember, a very early joke about the internet, and there's two dogs sitting looking at a screen, and one of them says to the other one, "The great thing about the internet is no one knows you're a dog." I think that first appeared in the New Yorker magazine. Well, how true that turned out to be as a prediction, because a whole generation now changes its name, changes its URL, changes its image. Selfies. Think about the whole concept of selfies. I've been MG Marg last week watching a group of monks in those beautiful blood red coloured robes, and one of them was walking along with a phone, smiling into it. If it was a mirror, if it was another generation, and someone was walking along with a mirror, looking into it and kind of smiling at it, you would have wanted to lock him up. So what is this? So here's this guy, and there's half a dozen monks behind him also smiling. So he's taking this picture of them all, and he's the presenter, making his own little movie. It's so fascinating, this. But the millions of selfies that are out there circling around in the cloud around the Earth, you know, we're interested in the ozone layer again. We're also interested in the cloud around the Earth. What are they for? Who are they for? Are those selfies to tell us about ourselves? These are really interesting kind of questions. Are they about connecting with others? Are they about connecting with ourselves? If we record different pictures of ourselves, does it mean that we're recording those moments in our life? And what are we going to do with them all? Where are they going? It's a really interesting thing. So how do these observations shape the lives of the young people that we're interested in finding books for? What's that about? How would that be a factor in determining which books? There are just so many aspects to the internet that I think are wonderful. I had a friend who was having a baby in New York on the other side of the planet, and I sent a toy for the baby, and it arrived perfect timing. And the day that that baby was born, I got a picture on the internet of the crib with the baby in it and the toy sitting there next to this newborn baby. That's just magical that can happen like that. How can it be that we have 1,200 close friends, 4,000 close friends? What does the word friend mean? Just like the word sharing. What does that mean? The physical distance between us can slip so easily into something negative, into something that separates us. Early on in the development of email, people used to laugh about offices where somebody would send an email to somebody down the hall instead of getting up off their backside, walking down the corridor and talking to the person. They would email them. That's actually common practice in a lot of businesses now. So we stopped thinking that was strange or funny, and we started accepting it. I think it's about keeping people at a distance. The internet brings us together, but it also separates us off. If that's the case, and if we are no longer certain what the concept of truth is, then can any parent say to a child now, "Don't tell me lies"? My parents said that constantly. Tell me the truth. Don't lie to me. If I were a parent of a young child now, I don't know what the heck I would say. Maybe I wouldn't say any of it. I'm not sure. But what it raises is the whole question of alternate facts. Again, I'm arguing that this did not arise with Kellyanne Conway or Donald Trump. Alternate has been developing as part of our life, our way of seeing the world, for a generation now. But the question is, what impact does that have on adults as caregivers for young people? Another consequence, of course, is a more sinister one, and that is antisocial activity. The whole business of slut-shaming, of embarrassing and shaming and humiliating people. That also is a way that the internet has, I think, been negative. In Australian schools, you are not permitted as a teacher to touch a child. If the child falls over in the playground, you're not allowed to pick the child up. You're not allowed to address the child as dear or darling or sweetheart or anything else that adults might say. You have to get another child to pick the child up off the playground. I feel very sad about this. I realise perfectly well that a few people, most of them men, have abused our trust in relationships between adults and children. But the price of that has been that there's suspicion attached to all men and to many other adults as well in their dealings with children. I would have trusted any of my LGBT friends with my children's lives, and yet the amount of suspicion that people who are LGBT have attached to them in their dealings with children is really shameful, I think. It's uninformed, but it's also shameful. So there is a sense in which I think the antisocial activity that the internet, again, it's not about the technology really. The technology has facilitated something in us. I was the generation for whom television was the new technology. My parents said that it would burn our eyes out, so we weren't allowed to sit too close to the screen. They said it would fry our brains, which was probably true. But there was nothing wrong with television. To watch the first landing on the moon on television, just like unforgettable. Who would give that up? But the bad use of television, well, I won't choose it, but I flip through the channels available in India and I see people yelling just non-stop. And I go, flick, 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 straight through. I do not want to watch that. I think of the findings instantly of the Stanley Milgram experiments in 1963 as a post-Holocaust interrogation, and in the context of the Nuremberg trials after World War II. These were interpreted as demonstrating the willingness of human beings to obey authority, regardless of their own moral ambivalence about doing so. But for me, I interpret these experiments as something else. We're more likely to inflict pain on people if there's no close connection. The director of one theatre project in Australia for people who are incarcerated, people who are in detention, young people, is to give them the chance to have physical contact. Because his argument is that it's only by knowing one another and by actually having physical contact with another that we can bring the temperature down in relationships, in antagonistic relationships. So for me, the experiments here where you may remember from your psychology studies that people were thinking that they were punishing someone with an electric shock. It was a fake. It was just a test to see whether people would obey, and it was obviously in the wake of the Nazi experiments. A very simple picture book by Sheila Deer, published by Tulika in 1999, asks a really direct question in the title: why are you afraid to hold my hand? It's a really beautiful book. It's just a few poems. It's not very expensively produced and it's not expensive to buy. But one of the poems in there says, "Don't smother me, give me my space, to live my life at my own pace. I don't like it when you fuss, it makes me feel so small. Let me do it my own way. So what if I should fall?" That's the line I love. So what if I should fall? So what Sheila Deer is saying here is, when you have a differently abled child, why are you depriving them of their risk-taking? Why do you think you need to step in and rescue that child or prevent that child getting into trouble? As a teacher, as a parent, it's a lesson I've had to learn, really hard lesson. Because if there's a pothole up the end of the road, you want to say to the person who's driving, "There's a pothole up ahead, look out." Actually, as a parent and as a teacher, I had to learn that it's better to let the person fall into the pothole if they weren't quick enough to see it, but be there to pull them out and to comfort them and to make sure that they know that they're not stupid for having fallen into a pothole. That happens in life, but that it's okay, and the important thing is to keep going. And that's exactly what that poem's saying. So the speaker seems to be saying keep your distance, but she's not. What she's saying is think about what it's like to be me, walking with the assistance of a cane or a stick, or living with the assistance of a wheelchair. I don't know if you've got anybody in your extended family or friends who are living with wheelchair assistance. One of the first things you notice is how darn difficult it is to access some of the ordinary places that you take for granted. Walking down the aisles in a shop, wheelchairs don't fit. Up the steps. We've spent a couple of decades now putting ramps in various places to make sure that we can give people more access. But what we've got is a risk-averse society, asking us to spend billions of dollars on the assumption that if we pay that money out and we have an insurance policy, we'll be right, mate. Nothing bad is going to happen. Well, bad things are going to happen. And the only way we can be ready for that is to know that we've got the resources. It's not to go, oh yeah, I can protect myself from it. We're going to cop trouble. For some people, being so explicit about difference will make the other person very defensive. So it's more effective sometimes to come at the challenging issue from an indirect path. As I said before about choosing a book for children, don't meet it head on, do it indirectly. My middle child is adopted and he has very black skin. Let me tell you that the last book in that child's life he ever wanted to read was that one, I Am Adopted. The publication of this book is based on a really faulty notion of what bibliotherapy is. Bibliotherapy, if it's not a term you've struck, has had a bit of a checkered career in the history of children's literature. The idea that that books can be therapeutic and cathartic for young. Therefore, people who approach that quite, I think, naively think, oh, great, so I've got a kid who's a refugee feeling a bit lost in this new country, I'll give him a book about refugees. That could maybe be the worst thing you could do. It might be much smarter to choose a really exciting book about an alien from outer space who ends up on the Earth and wants to get back and can't vehicle to take him or has run out of petrol or whatever it is. That would be way smarter because the person who's actually in that situation can hold it at arm's length. The book isn't accusing and saying, this is you. There's nothing, I really hope Indian parents don't do this. I haven't observed it, but Australian and American parents do. Sometimes they're so frustrated with whatever the day has brought them that they humiliate their kids without meaning to. It's not uncommon in a supermarket or in a shopping mall to hear a mother yelling at a child and saying, leave yourself alone, when the child's got his hand down his pants or something for about 2 seconds at the age of 2. It's like there's a huge sign in the supermarket saying, look at this kid and what he is doing. I think, again, that's what I would suggest we avoid. If we think that books are therapeutic or useful, then let's be smart about it. And let's look for indirect ways in which they could be useful.